Hello and welcome everyone back to another episode of Energy Unleashed. My name is Suzanne Worthley and I'm here with my co-host Kim Hess. Hey
Hello.
Kim, how you
I,
doing?
I am great today. Yeah,
That's good, right?
I
It's a
am.
good
Yeah.
day. It's a good day here in Minnesota because it's actually nice out. So I am going to talk about a client in particular, but actually this is a very common denominator subject that I find as a practitioner. And what we do on Energy Unleashed is I bring forward some of the things that I find in my practice, and I, kind of tell it from the client's perspective. They give me permission anonymously to share their story, but then Kim's kind of helps me unleash it, or we dig it out further because we find that everybody learns from one another. And in this particular case, this is so prominent right now. Had a darling client yesterday who I love to pieces. I've known her for quite a while. She's awesome at energy work. She understands a lot of this stuff. And yet she came in yesterday and was just pretty much out of sorts and had completely lost her boundaries. And so that's what I want to talk about today and unleash with Kim, is that this concept of setting boundaries. Now, I cover this subject pretty extensively in a myriad of ways in my new book, The Confident Empath, because basically empathing is all about boundaries and setting boundaries. And so when I'm in the situation with a client and I see how frazzled they are, they get so upset with themselves because they know this stuff to some extent. Most of them do, especially if they're a long-term client. And yet they just sort of get caught up in their 3D stuff. And that's what happened to this particular gal. And she's so adorable. She's young. She's got a lot on her plate, full-time job. She has a house. She's doing everything under the sun. She's just going, really 3D, right? I mean, we're just off and running in that 3D world. And just boom, you lose your spiritual practice. And I'm not saying that you have to sit there and meditate. In fact, I'm not telling you what to do at all. Take what resonates on all of these podcasts and just drop what doesn't. But if we don't spend time with our personal self, our body, our spirit, our mind, if we don't have some semblance of a protocol or a repeat pattern to really identify my boundaries, we can get caught up in that 3D crap world and we lose it by just not paying attention to my spiritual self. And then we are so messed up. Then it starts to affect us physically and emotionally and mentally. And that's what was happening to this gal. Now, prior to her, I had a client on the very same day who was talking about something else having to do with boundaries, which I want to throw into this unleashing as well, which is I don't talk to those people in my family because they're toxic. I have a boundary with them that I will not even broach. I will not break that because they are too, drag me down. They are too negative. They are just not working in my benefit to have a relationship anymore, et cetera, et cetera. So this is another element that I want to throw into it, because in some cases as a practitioner, I fully agree that we do not have to have a personal relationship, even with family, if we are really finding that this is a toxic situation. And some people think that that sounds like an awful thing to say. So we can talk about that with Kim in a second here. So when I talk about boundaries in the book, Confident Empath, it actually is a specific part in the book. And it's funny because on the bottom of it, I have it like on this page, on the bottom in italics is this whole section that I talk about a series of ways to look at this. I look at life sometimes, and this is how I explain it on this page. It is one page, page 177 to be specific. It is really understanding that our life is like sandboxes. It's a great metaphor. I have a sandbox for work. I have a sandbox for family. I have a sandbox for friends. I have a sandbox for whatever. Who is in my sandbox with me? Who is playing in my space, my outline? Who is playing with my toys? Are they standing in my sandbox and I have already offered them in? I have invited them. I have said, yes, you can share this space. Or did you just budge in my sandbox and take my toys? Are you spilling my sand out everywhere because I'm not commanding that space, and so on? So this sandbox metaphor, the way to look at it, is a great exercise, if you choose, to sit with your own self and say, hey, what's going on in my sandbox, and how are my toys changing, and who is in the way, or is it a reciprocal exchange of energy that's to my benefit, and so forth. So confident empath talks about boundaries 100% because that's what the empath is really in need of, is a better auric field boundary. And that's when we don't get vampired and our energy gets taken from us. So the whole book is on a concept of boundaries, but that page number 177 is really kind of like a great little snippet of a way to visualize different areas of your life, because you will find, we humans, we will pattern over and over and over the same kind of like lesson plan in different sandboxes. So I do the same thing at work as I do at my family, I do with my friends from grade school, as I do with my, this and that and the other thing. So it's just a great way to look at that. So I'm going to throw it to you, Kim. Did you remember I wrote about I talk about sandboxes all the time. I mean,
Yes.
you get that concept.
It's funny because I used to use sandbox as a description in the corporate world. And so it's
really?
funny that you brought it up and you're using it in your book because, and you used it in teaching too, that I used to use it way back when as, especially when like coworkers weren't getting along or there were different things going on. It's like, all right, we're all in the sandbox together.
Yeah.
Who's throwing sand? We do not throw sand in the sandbox. Let's figure out how we're going to share and how we're going, so I used to use this, which is
funny with a little different spin, but same thing. Because the sand, it's all just sand, right? But it's respecting those boundaries. And I see it all the time as like the kind you see in the playground with the big wood box, this is my space. Yeah.
Cool. And the wet sand underneath and
it can get mucky. So it's an interesting way to think about, but boundaries are tough. Like I said, this client yesterday, it was so adorable because she went through her client intake part, the more where we're doing Q&A and questioning and talking. And she kept going, oh my God, I know this. Oh my gosh, we've done this before. Oh my gosh, you've told me this 1,000 times. So we will find oftentimes that we are knowing this stuff, and yet we're not implementing it.
Yeah. And I think it's really super easy when you start to get busy and you're like, this time of year is really tough because you have graduation parties, weddings, family gatherings, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Memorial Day, like all of those things. You're making commitments to so many different things that you're running like place to place. And in between, you're trying to take care of yourself, your home, and what happens is the self actually doesn't get taken care of necessarily like it should. And so it's easy to get out of your habits that were really healthy, good habits as you create your boundaries and really work on making sure you're discerning what's yours and what's not. I've never done this before, right? Like how many times have I showed up in your office going, what's wrong with me? I can't just function right. Like what's happening?
Completely lost it.
Like, Kim, come on.
And it's not that Suzanne doesn't do it either. I mean, I certainly am just as, guilty as the other in terms of it, but I do my best to practice what I preach because I think that's fair as a practitioner and an author, is to be able to say, I don't have any right to give this as a suggestion if I don't listen to it. What I find is my body reacts and my brain reacts. And I think one of my indicators or red flags when I've lost my boundary is exhaustion, which is very typical. It is feeling that run down. It's looking in the mirror and wondering why my grandma's staring back at me instead of myself. It's that look where you just don't have that vitality at all. You're just gone. And that other thing is rumination. And I find when I am off, I do the before I go to sleep. And then I'm like, oh crap, now I've lost all of my personal boundaries, because that rumination junk does not happen when I'm balanced, because it's old triggers, it's old crap, it's old narratives and garbage that pulls up in that old computer in the back of your brain and starts to go. So my encouragement is to invite yourself to find your own red flag, to find your own trigger. Is it because I'm tired? Is it I'm ruminating? I'm not sleeping? I'm losing weight? I'm gaining weight? I'm eating poorly? I'm drinking too much? What are those were all my red flags.
I know those are all. I was like, wait, yep.
Check. So, these are things that we can do on a personal basis to be able to say, these are my red flags, which will then trigger. So a red flag and a trigger is two different things. A red flag is giving you that hint that, oh, here comes the trigger. Here comes the trigger. And then the trigger will kick in an old narrative that is not deleted from your programming. And so these are all things that are something we can work on. Now, what I told my clients yesterday, especially this one that I'm referring to mostly, we'll get to the other one about toxic in a minute. But what I told this first one was, it's important for us to find the red flag, find the trigger, but more so do the work to really delete the programming of the narrative, because that means that is not taken care of, right? Once we delete that negative programming, we don't have a reboot back to that. It's like a default setting. We don't have that default setting, so things will change.
Yeah, and I think as you're healing, there's layers, right? We talk about this all the time. There's like layers, onion layers, like you get through, you think you've gone through and you've eliminated, and it's deeper. And
Yes.
it's a trigger that's like, wait, I thought I already dealt with this. Why am I feeling so emotional about this right now?
Right.
And so then it's evaluating and digging in a little deeper and deeper. And I just recently had that situation with my family. It was old kind of wounds that not huge trauma, not whatever, but it was still there. And I thought that I had already made peace with that and let go of it and put it in the archives, and it was still there.
As a practitioner, you have no idea how many people say, I thought I already dealt with that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I did that in therapy 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I was so much better at that last year. And so these are really common denominators for people, but I encourage not just my clients, but anybody listening, please give yourself some patience and some respect and some kindness and some compassion as well, because we are human and we are involved in collective energies all the time. We're getting our butts kicked by Schumann resonance and CMEs from the sun. We are completely being puppeted and controlled 24/7. We are in eclipse seasons. We're in full moons. We are in crazy, crazy times. So the patience of just the process is something to really look at and honor as well. Now, that doesn't give you an excuse for not doing the work. So this is a good balance to find in here, right? I mean, I can look back and go, okay, I am human. I looked up the site on, the Schumann or the NASA. We are getting our butts kicked right now, or it is eclipse or full moon or solstice or equinox, whatever. I've got a lot going on, but that doesn't give me the excuse to just go into victimhood. Right. So when we get into these moments of losing our spiritual practice, we will oftentimes get into victimization again. Victimization is, remember, the other side of the same coin of the controller program. So we're either feeling out of control or we want to control everything and we feel like we're failing miserably. Therefore, I'm going to wallow in victimhood. So these are all the programs we talk about in the Empath book as well.
Yeah. So when you're like, if somebody new that's listening, maybe who hasn't read your book yet, or hasn't dealt with this, what do you recommend for them and how to actually get to know yourself that well, that you're starting to understand these core beliefs or beliefs that are creating, the results, the victim, and, what do you recommend? How do you start that?
I think that there's actually a couple of things, and thanks for bringing that up. I first and foremost think it's important for every human being on this planet to get to know their own body, to get to know their own field. And that's where the empath really loses it, because the field, the auric field, the bubble that contains your gasoline is depleted or non-existent. And therefore we are, empathing or taking or vampiring energy from everyone and everything just to coexist. That's a huge one. But body scanning, making friends with your body, knowing your triggers and your red flags here. Oh my God, my stomach is tightening. Oh my goodness, I'm next to this person and my throat feels like it has a noose around it. And really having that understanding of what the body physically is feeling like and reacting to as I navigate my day. And then being able to put actual feels to it and not just thinks. We had this discussion yesterday. How do you feel about that? Well, I feel sad. Well, sad is an emotion. It's not a feel. What does it feel like in your body to be sad? Sad is an emotion. Anger is an emotion. All of these things are emotions, and we think emotions are feels, and they're really not. What does it feel like when you're sad? Well, I feel tiny. I feel small. I feel like I'm shrinking. I feel like I'm invisible. We get really adept at the feel and owning that feel. When we do, it gets easier for us to go, I don't want to feel like that. That feels like crap. I don't want to do that. I'm going to change that. If we stay in the higher emotion and not get into the feel. Like if we stay in mad or we stay in angry, it's super easy to write that off. But when we go really deep and feel the sadness and the depth of isolation or invisibility or, all of these, like, I feel like I'm crumbling, I'm fading into the wall. I feel like I'm, on an island all alone. When we get into the feel of the feel, these are times when we will put the foot down and go, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not feeling like that anymore because it hurts, and I can change this, and I choose to change this. This is when we get our empowerment back. So body scanning, literally working with the feels, understanding the belief system, going back and doing the childhood work, because it all, of course, always goes back to that, doesn't everything, in terms of what's the belief and where did it come from, and examining, do I need that now? This is where we can broach our conversation into the next client in terms of, she said, I no longer am around my family because they're toxic. This is a choice that many people will take when they're examining belief systems or the way that they were growing up or the way that they've been treated by their parents as children and into adulthood. I will not tolerate that from my sister any longer, or whatever. They pull that boundary because that person is too toxic. And I, as a practitioner, can really honor that sometimes.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And what happens, I mean, what's happened for me is when you dig in and you really get to know your body and your reactions, the red flags, the triggers, you can totally go to that neutral place so much easier because you trust yourself more. When you're really out of whack, I found that I didn't trust myself very much in what I was doing or how I was doing it.
Right.
And so I think that that's really important to practice that, so that you can feel what's yours, what's not, what's coming. Like I can feel it boiling up. It's time to like get in a better place and be more neutral with what's happening right now.
And what I told this gal is you don't have to go swing the pendulum all the way over to, oh my gosh, now I have to meditate 2 hours a day. That is not the case. I was telling her when I was corporate and did massive international trade shows, being under fluorescent lights, being in charge of hundreds of thousands of people, being the boss and having all that stress, if I was losing it, I would jump behind the curtain and I'd pull out grounding rocks and I would work on myself for like 30 seconds to 45 seconds, sometimes maybe 3 minutes. Who doesn't have 45 seconds or 3 minutes in your day, people? Come on. We can do it in this line at Walmart. I mean, you can shift and paradigm shift every second of your day in very small ways, which will change everything. Baby steps make success, right? And so it is not going, oh my God, now I have to be the control freak. I'm the victim over here and I have to control my whole life to get back on track. That is not the message here. The message is baby steps. And in her case, get outside in nature, go back and do the things that fill your heart. You are being so adult at this point in time because your boundaries have been so broken. So do the things that fill your heart with joy. Go back, she's got a lot of fairy energy. Get outside, go work with the flowers, go dig in the dirt, go play in the sand. So play in the sandbox differently, right? So these are things that we can do in very small, tiny bites in our life, which will ultimately make a paradigm shift stick. Okay, this is important.
Yeah, no, I think another thing to do, like for me, what helped is I would take a few minutes and just write down what was happening and what the feel was. And then I could walk away from it because I would feel better that I got it out. But also I could go back and look at, okay, what was really going on with that?
Right.
Another time. So yeah, it's so important right now to find your boundaries and to really understand. Like we were at that conference recently and there's nobody around us. We're probably like 4 empty rows ahead of us and empty. And that one guy came in and walked and sat right in front of me. And I'm like, what is that all about? What am I feeling here? Because he just picked that seat out of all of these open seats.
Yep.
And we were off to the side and I'm like, okay, I really need to make sure and check in on myself.
Your hands were going like, yep.
Okay, everything. And yep. Okay. I think
Do you remember what happened?
What happened?
Do you remember what happened? He got up
and moved. He moved. He got up and moved after I did all of that. And you were like, I'm sure you were like,
yeah. Kind of like maybe you want to pick another seat. Yeah. Interesting. That was interesting.
It is.
Yeah, these are times when we really, really may choose to be more tenacious about our boundaries, right? I mean, that's really, and this is a boundary in everything, like you said, being at a conference, walking through Walmart, going to a family function. One of the things that I tell some of my clients and friends as well is watch the actual body in terms of the boundary. Like I have an egg around me, which constitutes my field, right? That person who I'm engaging with or not engaging with also has their egg. If those two eggs are too close in terms of not feeling comfortable, or if you're finding I'm getting empath because I'm so close to that individual, find space. You are cutting cords from that person. You are making space. You can even do space by using your hands to talk a little bit and cut those cords. And I'm just going to sort of move away from my mother-in-law just about 2 feet. And then you can find, oh, I don't feel dizzy now. I don't feel drained now. You can play with that super easy with your physicality and no one even knows that you're doing it. You don't even have to use or lose a heartbeat of conversation. You're just kind of playing with, oh, I got 2 inches. Now I got 4 inches. Oh gosh, now I feel okay. And then play again. I'm going to go forward 2 inches. Nope, that's not good. Go back 2 inches. So these are little games that we can do with ourselves. So we can do this with bosses. We can do this with people in retail. We can do this anywhere to justify that boundary again and know that, nope, I'm safe here. I'm safe here. Now let's take it bigger, because in the empath book, we write, I write multidimensional empathy. Watch yourself in buildings and spaces and land and places as well. These are boundaries that you may choose to not engage in. This place doesn't feel good to me. This is a toxic place. Maybe the antique store is just too much. Maybe the chemical aisle in the grocery store overwhelms me. There are things that the body will red flag. And again, find your flag. Is your flag my throat tightens? Is my shoulders get up? Am I pinned to my ears with my, rotator cuffs right now and I can't move? I mean, there's indicators in this beautiful vehicle that we call a body that say, run, fight or flight. You just got absolutely zapped. These are part of our birthright as being a human body. And we don't need to live in fight or flight if we honor the red flag. Right.
Yeah, no, the fight or flight, while it's so important that we have it, living in that continually, the stress that it creates in your body is so damaging.
Yes.
And it's nice to let that go, but know that you can feel, what's happening around you enough that you're not constantly in that adrenaline rush.
Yep. And boundaries are also, this is going to stretch it even more, unleash it a little more, for things like I'm watching the news. That's too much for me. I'm watching a violent television. I came around the corner and my husband watches stuff that there's no way I will put in my realm. Came around the corner the other night and I'm like, oh, hell no. Nope. I just, and zombie apocalypse chewing on body, I mean, that's kind of his dig. I'm like, no, that's just not good, for me. I'm not judging him. Well, I do judge him terribly when he watches stuff like that. It is not to my benefit. So this is similar to pulling that line with toxic relatives or workmates or friends, to just say, I'm pulling that with media. I'm pulling that with entertainment value also. I am very particular about large spaces and places and crowds with my boundary as well, because I lose my boundary. If I am in a place, especially with music and or electronic stimulation and sound beats, I can lose my complete boundary in a heartbeat. So I'm very careful with those choices.
No, that totally makes sense. Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that, part of that too is any kind of substances or things that you're doing too, when you get more and more into it, whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever, the more you go beyond your limits, you're also vulnerable and open up everything at that point. So,
and this is when we get hijacked and have hitchhikers that I write about as well. So that's a tough one. And I think it's important for us to know sometimes that this ascension process, we will find those relationships where the boundary ceases to even have a relationship anymore. I no longer need to be around that person. I encourage people to really look at that with a heartfelt space. There may be an ending to your soul contract. There may be a reason that you no longer need to entertain that behavior and or even that frequency or person. And it isn't a judgment on their being, it's a honoring of the ending of a contract. And that can be tough on people. That can be a really hard thing on people. But I encourage people to look at it from a higher space, that our soul contract, the lessons learned, the objectives that we came together for in passing in this incarnation are now null and void, and I can move forward. And that can give somebody some peace.
Yep. And allow the grief that might come with that, or whatever it might
Good
be.
point.
You know,
Good
you
point.
always, you need to deal with those emotions. Because I definitely have gone through that. My friendships have changed, you know,
Yep.
a lot. And,
Mhm.
and I'm okay with it, but during it, it was really tough. You
Or
know?
just watch Boundaries on Conversations, which is another kind of inner boundary. I can still have this group of friends, but I boundary certain conversation. And we were talking about this with the client yesterday as well. I can't, she was so adorable. She's like, I can't tell anybody the things that I tell you. This is why I really value our work together, because you don't think I'm crazy and you don't judge me, right? So we don't have to maybe have the friendship completely dissolve. We just draw a boundary on where the conversation goes to. This is a lot of what our family has, kind of like a unwritten rule. You know, we don't talk about politics. We don't talk about religion. We don't talk about this at the campfire after everyone's had a drink or five. We just don't do that, you know, because you don't want to get into those ridiculous judgmental conversations. It just doesn't happen. And we adhere to that pretty darn well, because it's just like, you know, that's the boundary. You cross that boundary. Or racism boundaries, or, you know, you can't talk like that anymore, Dad. Your age group doesn't understand. That's not acceptable. You know, I mean, these are boundaries that I think are really important to stay on top of and articulate and have the courage to stand firm in. I mean, it's even down to, no, you're not going to burn that styrofoam. That's not good for the environment anymore. Maybe that worked in the 50s, but it's not happening now. These are really critical boundaries that are different, but they're just as important, so that you are living your authentic truth and you're being comfortable with those around you to hold that truth, so that your body holds that frequency. And so boundaries are, you know, far, far, far reaching. So just maybe give yourself that presence of being in the body and going, holy crap, I just hit a boundary.
Yeah. Right.
You know, because it isn't always what we think it is. It can be much, much more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
that's a really great point to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the, I mean, you're, when you walk through your day, the more you pay attention to this, the more it's like, okay, yep. This is how it needs to be.
And it's going to change, because things are going to get more crazy, and everyone's like, yay. You know, this volatile energy of how we are moving through this process doesn't have to be scary, but it is going to be chaotic. So if we make peace with that chaos concept, we can learn how to pull stricter boundaries, and we can pull them and drop them, pull them and drop them. It doesn't mean it has to stay forever or whatever. We can modify, we can change, but just be present. That's
Absolutely.
the important part.
Be aware, be present. Yep. Absolutely.
Cool.
Good.
All
This is a
right.
good conversation. I think everybody needs to hear this once in a while, because it's so easy to fall off of the rails on this one. So,
and boy, oh boy, when you're ready, not pushing my services, but when you're ready, get your buddy into somebody to help you, whether it's yourself or a practitioner or whatever, because sometimes it's just getting back into that body and getting grounded and doing a reset. That's why we call them a tune-up. And so this is important also, self-care. Right?
Yes, definitely. And then there's so much information in your book.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect.
All righty. As always, take what resonates, toss the rest. We appreciate your time on Energy Unleashed. We're here to just share the information. And if you like this, please hit the like button or the share button. Tell your friends about it. The more that we get interaction on this platform, the better, because then we can do more service for you. So we appreciate you.
Great. And definitely leave comments or ideas. If you have other subjects you'd like to talk about, we're totally open.
For sure.
You know, to take a look at those. So enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And until next time, keep your boundary. Cosmic hugs.
Bye.
Bye-bye.